In a quiet little village surrounded by green hills, life was simple but hard. People woke up early, worked all day, and went to bed exhausted. Among them lived a woman who wasn't rich or famous, but was loved by everyone for her kindness. She didn't have much, just a small house with a garden full of vegetables and herbs, but she always found ways to help others. If someone fell sick, she'd bring them soup. If a child needed new shoes, she'd sew them herself. Everyone in the village respected her because even though she had so little, she gave so much. This woman had faced more than her share of pain. Years ago, her husband had died during one of the many fights that kept breaking out in their region. No one knew exactly why these battles happened. They just did. Sometimes soldiers would come through the village, demanding food or supplies. Other times, they'd accuse people of hiding weapons or helping rebels. Most villagers tried to stay out of trouble, keeping their heads down and hoping the storm would pass without taking anyone with it. But on this particular day, the storm hit harder than ever before. A group of soldiers marched into the village. Early in the morning, shouting orders and kicking open doors. Their armor clanked as they moved, and their boots left muddy prints on the dirt paths between houses. At first, no one understood what they wanted. Then the commander stepped forward, a tall, stern man with cold eyes and a voice like thunder. He accused the villagers of hiding rebels, saying he'd been told there were secret meetings happening right under his nose. The villagers denied it, of course. They weren't fighters. They were farmers and shopkeepers, mothers and fathers trying to survive. But the commander didn't believe them. His face turned red with anger when no one confessed, and he ordered his men to start arresting people. At random, one by one, villagers were dragged from their homes, their families screaming behind them. The atmosphere grew tense, filled with fear and confusion. That's when the commander made a decision that would change everything. He pointed to the woman standing quietly near the edge of the crowd. She hadn't said a word since the soldiers arrived, but something about her calmness irritated him. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, not with fear, but with sadness. Or maybe it was just bad luck. Whatever the reason, he singled her out, ordering his men to bring her forward. First, the villagers tried to stop them. "Leave her alone," someone shouted. "She hasn't done anything wrong." But the soldiers pushed them back, threatening to hurt anyone who got in the way. The woman didn't resist as they pulled her toward the center of the square. She kept her head down, her hands trembling slightly. When the commander demanded she answer his questions, she simply shook her head. She didn't know anything about rebels or secret meetings, and even if she did, she wouldn't tell him. The commander's patience ran out quickly. In a fit of rage, he ordered his men to strip her clothes off, intending to humiliate her in front of everyone. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the woman stood exposed, her dignity stripped away along with her clothing. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to beg or plead. She stood there, vulnerable yet strangely strong, as if some invisible force held her, upright despite the cruelty being inflicted upon her. And then something extraordinary happened. As the woman turned slightly, revealing her bare back to the crowd, the commander froze. His hand, which had been raised to strike her, stopped mid-air. His jaw dropped and his eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment, the entire world seemed to pause. Even the soldiers exchanged confused glances, unsure what had caused their leader to react so strangely. What the commander saw on the woman's back was unlike anything he'd ever encountered. It wasn't a scar or a birthmark. It was a symbol, intricate and unmistakable. The design looked ancient, almost otherworldly, glowing faintly against her skin as if it carried its own light. To most people, it might have seemed like nothing, more than an odd marking. But to the commander, it meant something far greater. It stirred memories buried deep within him, memories he'd tried desperately to forget. For years, he'd carried guilt over a betrayal from his past betrayal, involving someone who bore the exact same mark. That person had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only whispers of legends and curses. Now, staring at the woman's back, the commander felt as though the past had come back to haunt him. He muttered something under his breath, too, low for anyone else to hear, and lowered his hand. The woman, still trembling, wrapped herself tightly in the shawl someone had thrown to her. She didn't understand why the commander had suddenly stopped or what the strange look on his face meant. All she knew was that the nightmare wasn't over yet. As the soldiers led her away, the villagers watched in stunned silence, wondering whether they just witnessed a miracle or the beginning of something even darker. After the shocking moment in the village square, the woman was taken away by the soldiers. They led her to a large tent set up on the outskirts of the village, far from prying eyes. Inside, the commander ordered his men to leave, leaving him alone with her. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The tension that had filled the air earlier was replaced by an eerie silence. For a while, neither of them spoke. The woman sat on the ground, clutching her shawl tightly around herself, trying to cover as much of her body as possible. Her heart raced, unsure of what would happen next. Would he hurt her? Or was this some new kind of punishment? The commander paced back and forth, his boots making soft thuds against the dirt floor. He kept glancing at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, after what felt like hours, he stopped moving and turned to face her. His voice, which had been loud and commanding earlier, was now quieter, almost hesitant. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone laced with confusion and something else, fear. Maybe that the woman looked up at him, startled by the question. She didn't understand why he was asking or what difference it made. "I'm no one," she replied softly. "Just a woman from the village. I haven't done anything wrong." The commander shook his head, his brow furrowed. "No," he said firmly. "You're not just a woman. That mark on your back, it's not something ordinary. Where did it come from?" She frowned, confused. "What mark?" "I don't know what you're talking about." He hesitated for a moment, then knelt down beside her. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if he were afraid of startling her. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small piece of parchment and unfolded it. On it was a drawing, a symbol that matched the one etched onto her back. "This," he said, holding it up for her to see. "Do you recognize it?" She stared at the drawing, her mind racing. It did look familiar, though she couldn't explain why. The design was intricate, swirling lines forming shapes that seemed both ancient and powerful. But she'd never seen it before, or at least, she didn't think she had. I don't know," she admitted. "Why does it matter?" The commander let out a heavy sigh and sat down across from her. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked vulnerable, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. "Because," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "this mark belongs to someone I once knew. Someone who saved my life and countless others long ago. Someone who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. And now here you are, bearing the same mark." His words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. The woman felt a chill run down her spine. What was he saying? That she was connected to this person somehow? She shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't understand," she said. "How could I be related to anyone like that? My life has been simple, ordinary, nothing special." The commander leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Ordinary people don't have marks like that on their backs," he said. "Trust me, I've spent years searching for answers, trying to find the truth about what happened to the last person who bore it. Now you show up, and suddenly everything I thought I knew is being called into question." For a long moment, they sat there in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The woman tried to process what she'd just heard. Could it be true? Was she somehow tied to this legendary figure the commander spoke of? And if so, what did it mean for her? More importantly, why had no one ever mentioned this to her before? Her parents had died when she was young, leaving her with only fragments of memories. Had they known about this mark? Was that why they'd always seemed so protective of her? As if sensing her turmoil, the commander spoke again. "Listen," he said, his tone softer now. "I need to know more about you. About your family, your past. Anything you can tell me might help us understand what's going on here." She nodded slowly, still overwhelmed but willing to cooperate. After all, she had nothing to lose. My parents. She started, her voice barely above a whisper. They were good people. Hardworking. They never talked much about their lives. Before I was born, but sometimes I'd catch them looking at me funny, like they were worried about something. When I asked, they'd just smile and say I was special. Special, the commander repeated, nodding to himself. Yes, that makes sense. People with marks like yours often are. He paused, then added, but being special comes with a price. Danger follows those who carry such symbols. That's why I need to protect you for now, at least. Protect her? From what? The woman wanted to ask, but the look in his eyes told her he wasn't ready to share everything just yet. Instead, she focused on answering his questions, recounting every detail she could remember about her childhood. As she spoke, the commander listened intently, occasionally jotting notes on another piece of parchment. Every so often, he'd stop her to clarify something or ask for more information. By the time she finished, the sun had begun to set outside the tent, casting long shadows across the ground. The commander leaned back, rubbing his temples as if trying to piece together a puzzle. "There's more to this than meets the eye," he muttered. "Much more. But we won't figure it out tonight." He stood up and walked to the entrance of the tent, pulling back the flap to reveal the darkening sky. Turning back to her, he said, "For now, you'll stay here, under my protection. Tomorrow, we'll talk more. In the meantime, get some rest. You're going to need it." The woman nodded, too exhausted to argue. As the commander left the tent, leaving her alone with her thoughts, she wrapped the shawl tighter around herself and lay down on the hard ground. Sleep didn't come easily, not with so many questions swirling in her mind. Who was she, really? And what role was fate preparing her to play in the days ahead? Little did she know, her journey was only beginning. The next morning, the woman woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the tent. For a moment, she forgot where she was and why she was there. But as the events of the previous day came rushing back, the humiliation in front of the villagers, the strange mark on her back, the commander's cryptic words, her heart sank. She sat up slowly, pulling the shawl tighter around herself. The ground had been uncomfortable to sleep on, but exhaustion had finally won over discomfort. As sunlight streamed through the cracks in the tent, the commander entered, carrying a small tray with bread, cheese, and water. He set it down near her and gestured for her to eat. "You'll need your strength," he said, his voice calm but firm. There was no trace of the anger or cruelty he'd shown the day before. Instead, he seemed almost human now, vulnerable, even that she hesitated before reaching for the food. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but trust didn't come easily after everything that had happened. Still, she took a bite of the bread, chewing slowly as she watched him. "What happens now?" she asked, breaking the silence. He sighed, sitting cross-legged on the ground opposite her. "Now we figure out what you're meant to do," he replied. "That mark, it's not just a design. It carries meaning, power, and danger." Her brow furrowed. "Meaning? What kind of meaning?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "In my younger days, I served under someone who bore the same mark. A warrior, a leader who inspired loyalty and fear in equal measure. They were extraordinary, brave, skilled, wise. People followed them without question because they believed in their cause. But one day, things went wrong. Betrayal tore apart everything we'd built. That person vanished, leaving behind only rumors and legends. She listened intently, her curiosity growing despite her fear. "And you think I'm connected to them?" "Somehow? I don't know yet," he admitted. "But the mark doesn't appear by chance. It's passed down through bloodlines, though not everyone receives it. Only those destined for greatness or tragedy. Greatness or tragedy." The weight of those words settled heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't sure which scared her more. "Why me?" She whispered, more to herself than to him. "I'm nobody. Just a simple woman trying to survive." "You may see yourself that way," he said, "but the world doesn't always care how we see ourselves. Sometimes fate decides for us." For a while, neither of them spoke. She finished eating, her mind racing with questions she didn't know how to ask. Finally, she looked up at him. "If this is real, if I really am connected to whoever you knew, what does that mean for me? What am I supposed to do?" His expression hardened slightly. "That's what we need to find out. But first, you'll need training. You can't face what's coming unprepared." "Training?" she echoed, startled. "For what?" "For survival," he said simply, "and maybe something greater." Over the next few weeks, life changed drastically for the woman. Each morning, the commander woke her early, dragging her out of the tent to practice combat skills. At first, she struggled. Holding a sword felt awkward, and her arms ached after just a few swings. But the commander was patient, teaching her. "Step by step, start with basics," he told her. "Stance, grip, balance. Without those, nothing else matters." She learned quickly, surprising even herself. There was something instinctive about the movements, as if her body remembered things her mind had forgotten. By the end of the second week, she could parry simple attacks and deliver clumsy strikes of her own. The commander nodded approvingly, though he never praised her outright. "Good," he'd say again. But physical training wasn't the only thing on the agenda. In the afternoons, they discussed strategy, how to read an opponent's movements, anticipate their actions, and exploit weaknesses. He taught her about formations, terrain advantages, and the importance of morale. "War isn't just about strength," he explained. "It's about thinking ahead, staying calm under pressure, and making decisions others wouldn't dare." At night, when the sun dipped below the horizon, the commander shared stories of the past. Tales of battles fought, lives lost, and victories won. Through these stories, she began to understand the gravity of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone suffering under the rule of the occupying forces. Villages burned, families torn apart, hope crushed under the boot of oppression. Hearing these accounts stirred something deep within her, a fire she hadn't known existed. One evening, as they sat by a small fire inside the tent, she asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Why are you helping me? After everything you've done to me, to my village, why would you bother?" The commander stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "Because I owe it to the person whose mark you bear. I failed them once. I won't make the same mistake twice." His honesty caught her off guard. She realized then that he wasn't just some cold-hearted soldier following orders. He was a man haunted by guilt, seeking redemption. And perhaps in helping her, he hoped to heal old wounds died as the days turned into weeks. The woman grew stronger, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. She began to see herself differently. No longer was she just a villager scraping by. She was becoming someone capable of standing up against injustice. someone who could inspire others to rise alongside her. Word of her transformation spread quietly among the villagers. Though they didn't fully understand what was happening, they noticed subtle changes. When soldiers came through demanding supplies, she stood tall, refusing to cower. When children cried out of hunger, she organized efforts to share what little food remained. Slowly but surely, people started looking to her for guidance. Even the commander noticed the shift. One afternoon, as they sparred under the hot sun, he stopped mid-swing and lowered his weapon. "You're ready," he said, breathing heavily. "Not completely, but enough to start." "Start what?" she asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "Rebellion," he replied, his tone serious. "The people here have suffered long enough. With your leadership and that mark, they'll follow you. Together, we can strike back." Fear and excitement clashed within her. Could she really lead a rebellion? The thought terrified her, but deep down, she knew it was the right thing to do. For her village, for her family, for everyone counting. On her dot with newfound determination, she nodded. "Tell me what to do." And so, the plan began to take shape. The commander mapped out strategies, identifying weak points in the enemy's defenses. Meanwhile, she reached out to trusted villagers, rallying support and gathering resources. It wouldn't be easy. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something their oppressors lacked: unity. As the final pieces fell into place, the woman couldn't help but feel a mix of dread and hope. Whatever lay ahead, she knew. One thing for certain, her quiet, ordinary life was gone forever. From this point on, she would fight not just for survival, but for freedom. The rebellion began on a cold, moonless night. The woman stood at the edge of the village, her breath visible in the frosty air. As she watched groups of villagers quietly gathering weapons, anything they could find. Farm tools, kitchen knives, even sharpened sticks. They weren't soldiers, but their determination burned brighter than any sword. She felt a lump rise in her throat as she looked at them. These were her people, risking everything for a chance at freedom. The commander had spent days planning the attack, choosing targets carefully to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Their first goal was simple: strike hard and fast, sending a message to the occupying forces that the villagers wouldn't stay silent anymore. He'd picked an outpost on the outskirts of the region, lightly guarded but strategically important. If they could take it, they'd gain supplies, weapons, and most importantly, morale. As the group moved through the dense forest surrounding the outpost, the woman stayed near the front, her heart pounding with every step. She clutched a dagger, tightly in one hand, its weight unfamiliar but comforting. Behind her, whispers passed between the villagers, nervous energy buzzing like static in the air. She turned to face them, raising a hand to signal silence. "Stay close," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "We do this together." When they reached the clearing where the outpost stood, the commander signaled for everyone to spread out. Shadows danced across the ground as torches flickered weakly along the wooden walls of the structure. Guards patrolled lazily, clearly not expecting trouble. The woman crouched low behind a tree, watching as the commander motioned for two men to sneak around the back and disable the guards stationed there. Her pulse quickened as she waited for the signal. It came, a sharp whistle, and chaos erupted. Villagers surged forward, shouting and brandishing their makeshift weapons. The guards barely had time to react before they were overwhelmed. The woman found herself face to face with one of them, a young man no older than herself. His eyes widened in shock as he fumbled for his sword, but she didn't hesitate. With a cry, she lunged forward, driving the dagger into his side. He collapsed, clutching his wound, and she stumbled back, horrified by what she'd done. For a moment, the noise of battle faded, leaving only the sound of her ragged breathing. She stared down at the fallen guard, guilt washing over her. But then she remembered why they were fighting for the countless lives destroyed by these very soldiers. For the families torn apart, the homes burned, the hope crushed under boots of tyranny. Swallowing hard, she forced herself to move forward. Joining the others as they secured the outpost. By dawn, the fight was over. The villagers cheered, their voices echoing through the trees as they celebrated their first victory. Inside the outpost, they found crates of food, medicine, and ammunition resources that would keep them going for weeks. But more valuable than anything else was the sense of unity that now bound them together. These ordinary men and women had proven they were capable of extraordinary things. Word of the attack spread quickly. Neighboring villages heard about the uprising and began reaching out, eager to join the cause. Within days, the rebellion grew larger than anyone had anticipated. People traveled from miles away, bringing whatever they could spare to support the effort. Farmers donated grain, blacksmiths forged crude weapons, and healers offered their skills to tend to the wounded. The woman became the face of the movement, her courage inspiring others to stand up against oppression. But with success came danger. The occupying forces couldn't ignore the threat anymore. Reinforcements poured into the region, led by a ruthless general known for his brutality. Rumors painted him as a monster, someone who showed no mercy to those who opposed him. When scouts reported his approach, fear rippled through the ranks of the rebels. Many wondered if they'd bitten off more than they could chew. The commander called a meeting to discuss their next move. Gathered around a large map spread across a table, he pointed to a plateau overlooking the village. "This is where we'll make our stand," he said, his voice grim. "It's defensible, and we can use the terrain to our advantage. But it won't be easy. He'll bring everything he has." The woman listened intently, her mind racing. This wasn't just another skirmish. It was the battle that would decide their fate. If they lost here, the rebellion would crumble. But if they won, hope might spread like wildfire, igniting change across the entire region. "We can do this," she said firmly, looking around at the faces of her fellow fighters. "We've already shown we're stronger than they think. Together, we'll show them we're unstoppable." Her words bolstered their spirits, and preparations began immediately. Barricades were built, traps set, and strategies rehearsed until everyone knew their role. The woman trained tirelessly, honing her skills with the dagger and learning to lead with confidence. The commander taught her how to read the battlefield, anticipate enemy movements, and inspire her troops. "You're not just fighting for yourself," he reminded her. "You're fighting for all of them." Finally, the day arrived. The plateau buzzed with activity as rebels took their positions, weapons ready and nerves taut. The woman stood at the center, her eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of the general's army. Drums thundered, shaking the ground beneath their feet as hundreds of soldiers marched toward them. When the enemy reached the base of the plateau, the general stepped forward, flanked by elite warriors clad in gleaming armor. His voice boomed across the battlefield, demanding surrender. "Lay down your arms, and I'll spare your lives," he shouted. "Resist, and you'll regret it." The woman stepped forward, her figure silhouetted against the sky. "We will never surrender," she cried, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "You've taken enough from us. Today we take back what's ours." With a roar, the battle began. Arrows flew, swords clashed, and cries filled the air as the two sides collided. The woman fought with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, dodging attacks and striking back with precision. Around her, villagers battled fiercely, driven by desperation and hope. Slowly but surely, they pushed the enemy back, gaining ground inch by inch. But but the tide turned when the general himself entered the fray. Towering above the rest, he cut through the rebels with ease, his massive blade gleaming in the sunlight. Panic spread among the fighters as he advanced, unstoppable and terrifying. Finally, he reached the woman, pinning her against a rock with his weapon raised high. "This is where it ends," he snarled, hatred burning in his eyes. She closed her own eyes, bracing for the blow, but instead of striking, he froze. Something in her expression, calm, resolute, stopped him. Lowering his sword slightly, he stared at her, confused. "Why aren't you afraid?" he demanded. "Because I have nothing left to lose," she replied softly, "and because I believe in something bigger than myself." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For a moment, doubt flickered in his gaze, replaced by something almost human. Then, without warning, he dropped his sword and stepped back. "Finish me," he said, his voice hollow. "I've done enough harm." Stunned, the woman hesitated. Killing him would be easy, but was it right? After a long pause, she shook her head. "No," she said. "Your punishment isn't death. It's living with what you've done." The general sank to his knees, defeated not by force but by compassion. As his remaining troops surrendered, the plateau fell silent. The rebels erupted into cheers, lifting the woman onto their shoulders as tears streamed down her face. Against all odds, they had won not just the battle, but the beginning of a new future. The aftermath of the battle was both chaotic and surreal. The plateau, once a quiet stretch of land overlooking the village, now bore the scars of war-scattered weapons, torn banners, and patches of earth stained dark with blood. The woman stood at its edge, gazing out over the landscape as the sun began to set, painting the horizon in hues of orange and gold. Her body ached from hours of fighting, but it was her mind that felt heaviest. She had faced death, dealt it out, and somehow emerged on the other side. Yet, instead of triumph, she felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Around her, villagers celebrated cautiously, their cheers tempered by exhaustion and grief. Many had been injured, some hadn't made it through the day. The losses weighed heavily on everyone, including the woman. She walked among them, offering words of comfort and gratitude. "We did this together," she told one elderly man who sat wearily on a rock, clutching a bandaged arm. "Because of you, because of all of us, we have a chance." Her presence seemed to calm people, even though she didn't know personally. They looked at her not just as a leader, but as a symbol. Reminder that ordinary people could rise above extraordinary circumstances. Some called her brave, others called her fearless, but deep down she knew better. She wasn't fearless. She was terrified every step of the way. What kept her going wasn't courage alone. It was the belief that giving up wasn't an option. As night fell, the commander approached her. He had been busy organizing the cleanup and tending to the wounded, his usual stoic demeanor softened by the weight of what they'd accomplished. "You should rest," he said, his voice low. "Tomorrow will bring new challenges." She nodded but didn't move. Instead, she gestured for him to sit beside her. For a while neither spoke, content to watch the stars appear one by one in the vast sky above. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked, her tone uncertain. "Or is this just the beginning?" He sighed, leaning back on his hands. "It's never really over," he admitted. "Wars leave scars, not just on the land but on people. Healing takes time. But today was a start. You gave them hope. And sometimes hope is more powerful than any weapon." His words stayed with her long after he left to check on the sentries posted around the camp. Hope, that fragile, intangible thing, was what had driven them all to fight. It wasn't just about defeating the enemy. It was about rebuilding what had been broken. about creating a future where no one had to live in fear anymore. In the days that followed, the rebellion transformed into something greater than anyone had imagined. News of their victory spread far beyond the village, reaching distant towns and cities. People who had lived under the shadow of oppression for years began to rise up, inspired by the story of a humble woman who refused to bow. Messengers arrived daily, bringing offers of support, supplies, and volunteers eager to join the cause. The plateau became a makeshift headquarters, bustling with activity as plans were drawn up to expand the movement. The woman found herself thrust into a role she hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. Leaders from neighboring regions sought her counsel, looking to her for guidance on how to resist without losing their humanity. She listened to their stories, shared her own experiences, and encouraged them to work together rather than splinter into factions. Unity, she realized, was their greatest strength, but leadership came with its own burdens. Decisions that once seemed simple now carried immense consequences. When disputes arose between groups within the rebellion, she mediated patiently, reminding everyone of their shared goal. When resources ran low, she rationed fairly, ensuring no one went hungry. And when doubts crept in, when she wondered if she was truly capable of leading such a massive effort, she remembered the faces of those who believed in her. Their trust was a gift, and she couldn't let them down. One evening, as she sat by a fire surrounded by a small group of advisors, the commander joined them. His expression was unusually somber, and he hesitated before speaking. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, drawing curious glances from the others. "About the mark on your back." The woman straightened, her curiosity piqued. Since the day it had first been revealed, she'd thought little about it beyond its connection to the legendary warrior the commander had served under. "What about it?" she asked. He glanced at the others, then back at her. "It's fading." Her hand instinctively went to her back, though she couldn't see the mark herself. "Fading? What does that mean?" "It means your purpose here may be nearing its end," he explained gently. "Legends say the mark appears only when needed and disappears once its bearer fulfills their destiny." A chill ran down her spine. "Are you saying my part in this is almost over?" He nodded slowly. "Possibly. But remember, the mark is just a symbol. What truly matters is what you've done and what you'll continue to do even without it." The realization hit her like a wave. If the mark disappeared, would people still follow her? Would she still feel worthy of leading? Doubt gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. Whether or not the mark remained, she had already proven herself, not through magic or prophecy, but through action and resolve. Months passed, and life began to change across the region. Villages once ravaged by conflict started to rebuild, their streets filled with laughter and song again. Farmers returned to their fields, merchants reopened their stalls, and children played freely without fear of soldiers storming in. The occupying forces, weakened and demoralized, withdrew entirely. Unable to maintain control in the face of widespread resistance, the woman played a key role in negotiating peace agreements, ensuring that power was handed back to local leaders rather than centralized authorities. Her compassion and wisdom earned her respect even from former enemies, many of whom expressed regret for their actions during the occupation. Forgiveness wasn't easy for anyone, but it was necessary if they hoped to heal. Eventually, the day came when the rebellion officially disbanded. Its members returned to their homes, carrying with them lessons learned and bonds forged in the heat of battle. The woman watched them go with mixed emotions, pride in what they'd achieved, sadness at seeing them leave, and uncertainty about what lay ahead for herself. When the last wagon rolled out of sight, she turned to the commander who had stayed by her side throughout everything. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing the question she'd posed months earlier. He smiled faintly. Now you live, find peace. Rediscover the life you fought so hard to protect. She nodded, though she wasn't sure where to begin. Returning to her old life felt impossible after everything she'd experienced. Still, she resolved to try. She visited the graves of those who had fallen, paying her respects and promising to honor their sacrifices. She tended to her garden, coaxing new life from the soil. And she spent time with the villagers, listening to their dreams for the future. One morning, as she stood in front of her mirror brushing her hair, she noticed something startling. The mark on her back was gone. Where intricate lines had once swirled, there was now smooth, unblemished skin. A pang of loss shot through her, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of completion. The mark had guided her, protected her, and given her purpose, but it wasn't who she was. She had become more than a symbol. She had become a person defined by her choices and actions. Years later, when travelers passed through the village, they would hear stories of the woman who had led a rebellion and changed the course of history. Some claimed the mark on her back had magical powers. Others believed she was chosen by fate itself. But those who truly knew her, the ones who had stood beside her in the darkest moments, knew the truth. She was simply a woman who had refused to give up, who had found strength in vulnerability and hope in despair. And in doing so, she had shown the world that even the simplest among us can leave an indelible mark.